Would you say it's accurate to say you're at least one of the custodians of our history, especially when it comes to heritage, culture, food, and how the three kind of intersect? Because there's so much that, is not exactly written down. Welcome to Chefing Beyond the Kitchen. I'm your host, Marau. Join us for conversations with amazing people doing amazing things in food. Today we are chatting to the incredible Anna Trapido. She is a chef and food anthropologist. She has published 4 books that have gone on to win World Gourmand Cookbook Awards, and she writes for numerous South African and international publications. Welcome back to Chefing Beyond the Kitchen, and today I'm extra excited. We are chatting to the incredible Anna Trapido. Anna, you were the first name on my list when I thought of doing this podcast, so I'm excited that you could make some time for us.
Oh, well, thank you. That's very sweet of you.
So before we get into the actual conversation, we're going to start with some icebreakers to just loosen up and get into a mood to chat.
Okay.
Yeah. So my first question is, when is the last time you smiled and why?
I mean, other than like sort of smiling at you when I arrived and that kind of thing, my 16-year-old, this probably just says I'm very greedy, that my 16-year-old made peach and plum crumble last night. That was... and just sort of did it on a nice, on a rainy day. So I think that probably was the first sort of, that's the last time I smiled, I suppose.
That would make me smile.
Yeah, no, it was very worthy of smiling.
Yeah.
Crumble on a wet day.
Oh, sweet. And what is your favorite thing right now?
My favorite thing?
Could be anything.
Gosh. This is going to sound really weird. I have these little obsessions, so I don't know, if it's my favorite thing, but it is the thing that I am kind of most engaged with right now. There is a landrace banana. This is sounding madder and madder as I talk, but there is a banana that King Shaka loved. That you only get around sort of St. Lucia, Empangeni, that sort of part of like northern Natal. And so, I found this thing, and sometimes it gets called ukova, and sometimes it's called banana kashaka. Yeah. And in English, I think it's called gentleman's thumb bananas. And so I found this in the historical record, and I thought, I need to know what kind of banana that is.
Oh, I just saw it on your Instagram.
Yeah. So I have been like a fox terrier hunting out that banana. So I suppose at the moment my favorite thing is that ukova.
Is that banana.
Yeah.
Well, can you still find it? Does it still grow?
It does still grow. And I'm told actually it's also used as an insult, that it comes up in the in the Truth Commission hearings, that people died over this insult. That
sure.
But that it's a thing that ANC people used to call IFP people, and occasionally that came to blows. And I think they probably mean that you are very old-fashioned and traditional. I think that's probably what the insult is meant to imply.
Yeah.
But you can still find them, and I've found a group of very nice rastas just outside St. Lucia who are growing them. So I'm going to go on a road trip. I'm going to bring back a whole lot. I'll bring you some.
Yes, please.
Yeah.
Be interesting to taste them. Yeah.
And I think that, Shaka was using them almost more like a plantain, that you can eat them raw or cooked. So they're not like West African cooking bananas where you can only eat them cooked. But I think that he kind of understood them as a start rather than as like a dessert.
That is very interesting.
So I suppose that's my favorite thing at the moment.
That's a very cool favorite thing to have.
These funny little fat bananas.
Yeah. And if you could host 3 people for dinner, A very cheesy question, but I love this question. If you could host 3 people for dinner, who would they be and why?
You see, this question made me very anxious because I started kind of overthinking it that, I don't like hosting because I get very anxious. So
okay, you're taking them to a restaurant. Yeah. Someone else is cooking.
I mean, I know you're supposed to say like Napoleon and Nelson Mandela and, that. So that was my first thing is I was anxious about hosting. Then I was anxious that the 3 people might not like each other.
Ooh, that's also a thing.
Yeah, because, I think that it's a thing that I quite like about myself is that I'm quite sort of chameleon-y, and so my friends are very diverse, but I tend to interact with them one-on-one.
Oh, so, as opposed to bringing them together.
Yeah, that on the whole, the people I love don't necessarily love each other. So that worried me. I mean, if I think about the people that I have most... Yeah, they sort of fall into different categories. So firstly, I'm not sure I want to be hosting.
Okay.
Although I don't mind if it's one-on-one. I just like dinner parties don't suit me. I don't like other people's dinner parties, and I don't like hosting like 7 people at a time.
I hear you.
But if I'm having them one at a time, the person who I think I most admired, if we're choosing our kind of Napoleon kind of person, is when I wrote that Mandela food biography, the person who I just thought was most extraordinary and who doesn't get the most credit because, everybody in that book, they were all of that astonishing generation that, they changed the world. They were all brilliant in their different ways. But Joe Matthews, who was Naledi Pandor's dad, was just amazing. I've never met anybody so clever in my whole life. I mean, really, amazing. I'm sure that his IQ must be completely off the charts. And I've never met anybody with a completely photographic memory before. So if you said to him, so tell me about, his parents were academics at Alice, at Fort Hare, like at the time that Mandela was there. And he could tell you the name of the shopkeeper that sold the bread and the different, there was absolutely nothing he couldn't tell you about Alice in like the 1930s. And he could do that for everything, for the Congress of the People, which was actually his idea. I mean, and just every event, he remembered everything. And all of those guys, they all said they remembered and everyone else was wrong. But Joe Matthews really did. And he was just so sweet and generous. And so I loved him. So I would like to have Joe Matthews to dinner. And I think, I was terribly flattered because he liked me back. And, those guys got interviewed over and over again. And nobody ever wanted to know about them because they all only wanted to know about the Mandela connection. So everybody interviewed them about Mandela. And some very grand person, wanted to interview him about Mandela, and he said he would only do it if I interviewed him because he was being trouble. He was actually just like trying to cause shit.
Or he really, really liked you.
No, he did kind of like me, but I knew nothing about the topic in question, and so anyway, I loved him, and I think I'm very flattered that I think he loved me back.
I think so.
My friend Andrea Bergener, who runs the Leopard Deli, is the person that just makes me laugh the most. So I think if I just wanted to sort of describe all the ways in which I have messed up in the last month, it's like all the embarrassing things I've done. Andrea and. Yeah, Andrea in Chinatown would be my thing.
Yeah.
And somehow her life is always even more kind of chaotic and
You gotta love that.
For instance, she hasn't, the traffic police are not going to see this. She hasn't had a driver's license because she lost it about 20 years ago, which means, and she just hasn't got round to going round to reapply. So there's only certain places we can meet because she knows exactly where all the traffic cops are.
Oh my God.
So, and that sort of is like, my life's a bit like that. And a third person, I don't know, I would quite like to talk bananas with Shaka at the moment. So
that would be interesting.
He's my kind of Napoleon on the list, I suppose.
Yeah.
I think Joe and Shaka might like each other.
I think so.
That they're the sort of guys who do have their driver's licenses. So
I think your friend is interesting enough that they'd find her interesting.
Yeah. She's very beautiful as well, so maybe, Anyways.
Also nice. Doesn't hurt.
Yeah.
So one of sort of the main reason I wanted to have you here was I'm very interested in what it is that you do for a living. I know you said there is no plan, but I'm keen to know what a food anthropologist does. I mean, the work that you've done in documenting and preserving our food stories has been incredible. And since the day I heard about you and what you do, I've wanted to talk to you.
Oh, well, because I'm a huge fan of yours. I'm always telling people how clever you are. And
thank you.
What a brilliant idea that kind of lazy makoti concept is. And I mean, it's just fantastic. So clever.
Thank you so much.
But, okay, so what do food anthropologists do?
Because we know what an anthropologist is, but tie it with the food part for us.
Look, what I tend to do is, I have this quite diverse training. So, I have degrees in social anthropology. I have actually a first degree in biological anthropology. So, if you hand me ancient hominid skulls, I can say that one is Homo habilis, because I can tell by the brow ridge and that kind of stuff. Or I can say that skull, that's a female baboon because look at the jaw, it's more gracile and that kind of thing. Yeah. So I have a degree in social anthropology, in biological anthropology, and then my PhD is it's from the Department of Community Health, but essentially it's anthropological. It was about the way that people's health interacts with the rest of their lives. And then I went to chef school, partly because I come from the sort of family where it didn't occur to me. I always liked to cook, and it didn't occur to me that you could do that. You were supposed to be the sort of person that passed exams and, became an academic kind of thing. So I realized very late that what I would really like to be as a chef. So I have this qualification from the Prue Leith Chef School. So what I tend to do is use all of those things together. So I know about health and culture and knife skills and sauces and stuff. And I think what that does allow me to do is when I am watching people cook, I'm quite observant. So if I am in a culinary culture that I don't know, I can say, that's interesting. I wouldn't have done it that way. I'd have done it this way. Just explain to me why you did that. So I'll notice, like the way, for instance, if you're in almost any Black South African household, if you go to chef school, you get taught you seal the meat first, right? Whereas if you watch the way people cook, what they do is they put the meat in the pan and they reduce and reduce and reduce, and then it fries in its own fat at the end. And you think, oh, that's interesting. That's not what Escoffier said, So I think my training makes me able to kind of spot those differences and then, sort of be able to understand what it is that makes that difference. Is that about the amount of firewood people have, the amount of time they have, that what is it that changes the way people cook? Why do people, pre-apartheid and post-apartheid, why do they cook differently? And a lot of it's about things like apartheid geography. If you're traveling so far to get in and out of work, all of those long, slow kind of stews that require time just are suddenly only possible on special occasions. So then there's stock cubes, then there's deep frying, that it changes the way you cook because your life is different. That's kind of what I do. Does that help at all?
It does. So you really answer the why behind food and cooking and cultures and heritage and how they kind of intersect.
I like people and I like food and I like looking at what the food says about the people.
Incredible.
And I've sort of found that spot in the Venn diagram.
Where they all meet.
That is a Venn diagram, isn't it? Where you've got the two circles.
It is, where they all meet.
Yeah.
So take me back to the very beginning. How did Anna become this Anna? Your upbringing, how you kind of knew that this is what you wanted to do? Or you found yourself doing what it is that you do right now?
Well, I think that I have this quite sort of childlike, I can see all sorts of things wrong with South Africa. I'm not stupid, but I go on just sort of, this is the magic place. And that's partly because I think people must be very careful how they are with their kids and what they say around their kids, because, that was my dad, that I grew up in Oxford in England. And, my father was a political exile. And firstly, he just created this vibe that it wasn't worth getting to know this place, because in 5 years' time we'd be home. And he and his chummies said that all the time. In 5 years' time we'll be home. And they just kept stretching the 5 years, so that 25 years later they were all still in England. And he also, anytime we did anything nice in England, he would say it's not as nice as the equivalent thing in South Africa. So if you were on the beach in Brighton, he would say it's not as nice as Clifton. And he told these sort of romantic stories about mangoes that were so juicy you had to eat them in the bath. And so, that in my head, this space is the promised land quite literally. And I read once that medieval monks would walk around all over, they maybe started in the north of Scotland, and you'd find them buried in Spain or Portugal or wherever. And they said you just had to keep walking around until the sky opened up and you were closest to God. And that's where you build your church. And I sort of feel, that Johannesburg in particular is where the sky opens up and I'm closest to God, and, my funny sort of secular God, but... so I don't even, what was the question?
I get like that also sometimes. But the question was around, your upbringing, how you grew up, and how you came to this career, to doing what it is that you do.
So I think I am completely sort of...
Your life story, basically.
I really... this terroir really does it for me. The sky opens up and all that. That I didn't really have a plan. I knew that I needed to be here, and that my being here coincided, my graduating from university coincided with the unbanning of the ANC. So suddenly that was possible. And I didn't even go to my graduation, I just got on a plane. So I needed to be doing something here, and, I had these qualifications in this kind of bit useless degree, and the first thing I did with it was I I worked for Operation Hunger for a bit, which was fun because I just had a driver's license. I was a very new driver. And so actually I am best at driving on rural roads because that's where I really learned how to drive. So I did that with this was all over the Western Cape, so with my very, very odd Afrikaans. Then I worked for quite a long time in the Eastern Cape, in Pondoland, with old men who had been mine workers. And that project was around occupational lung disease and wasn't supposed to be about food at all. It was supposed to be about compensation claims and why they hadn't been paid and, rectifying that error. But I sort of, I probably got over-involved with that community. So I was always sort of sitting there asking people about, so how did you meet your wife? And, those kinds of things. And, because these queues were very long, that it was just hundreds and hundreds of sick old men. I used to get up early and make lunch because I didn't know that other epidemiologists didn't make their study subjects lunch. Yeah. So this was in this little hospital in a district called Libode, which is just outside Mthatha. And we had roast chicken and 2 kinds of bread. And it sort of occurred to me that halfway through that project, that I loved those old men and I loved being able to provide the compensation services. And I really liked making them lunch, which is when I went to chef school. Nice. And when I came out of that, I was a very junior chef and a person with a PhD. And I remember being in a kitchen piping biscuits at 2 a.m. and crying. Everyone else had gone home and I was quite slow, so I was still there piping and flooding these biscuits. Thinking, nobody cares that I've got a PhD because it wasn't relevant, And so I think what I have done since then is try and find ways of linking those skills.
And to come together.
Yeah, and quite often, when people say to me that they hate their jobs and they want to start again and do something in the food industry, I think the kind of particular odd way that I've done what I've done is probably unique to me, but that I do think that circles join up, that you don't necessarily know how the bits fit together. But, if you're an accountant that hates being an accountant and you want to go to chef school, actually that's a very useful skill if you're going to run a restaurant or whatever, that the bits join up in the end.
The dots will always connect.
Yeah.
Yeah. I love that.
Yeah.
I love that. Actually, the story that you're kind of sharing of you piping the biscuits is kind of the why behind this podcast. I meet so many people that ask, I love food and I love cooking. Should I be a chef? And the answer isn't always yes. And so with this, we're trying to expose people to what else is out there that is still working with food and in that world, but not necessarily being a chef in the traditional kitchen.
And look, I can do that chefy thing, but it does not suit my personality. That my lovely friend Coco Reinhardt, the chef, asked me recently to do a function with him in Cairo and at this Creative Africa Nexus conference.
Yeah.
And, I was so unkitchen fit, that I had, lost all of the kind of timing and all of that. And I kind of pulled it off, but it just confirmed for me that I really don't want to be like a chef doing 200 people 8 o'clock on a Friday night kind of thing.
I hear you.
Yeah.
Yeah. And speaking of, Shaka, like you mentioned, as we are starting this conversation, tell me about the amazing work that you're doing at Shaka Ilembe, and what's that experience been like?
Well, actually, that came out of going to that conference in Cairo.
Yeah.
Because I saw the director, like at breakfast in this hotel we were all in. And I was a bit cheeky. And I just said, the food's all wrong in season 1. And why...
So you had watched season 1?
I had seen season 1.
Yeah.
And, for one thing, I said, why are all the women, they sit around, like, by the river gossiping, when you need, like, the women's story to be moved along. They're all sitting there. This is an agricultural society where women did nearly all the work.
Yeah.
Why is there no farming? There's literally no farming in season 1. And why are there white mealies that were, that variety of mealie was only created, it was created by the mining industry in the 1930s.
Yeah.
There are beginning to be mealies in that part of Natal in the early 19th century, but not those mealies.
Yeah.
Those are completely wrong. And so there I was being a smart ass.
We love it.
And to his credit, he phoned me 2 weeks later and said, would I come and be their historical food advisor?
Sure.
Which in lots of ways is my perfect job, because actually there is lots of descriptions of food, in Shaka's era and at Shaka's court, but it's not ever the main topic, which means that the kind of, a lot of those sources have got all sorts of biases in them.
True.
That they're colonial biases or missionaries or whatever it is, but they're not thinking that they're talking about the food. So they're actually quite accurate on the food stuff, that you don't want their opinions on the nature of Zulu personalities or any of that. So you just ignore all of that. But in the middle of it is a description of exactly how the meal was cooked.
Yeah.
So, I have gone through all the documents, and there's a whole lot of, European traders who arrive in Natal in 1824, which is kind of the height of Shaka's power. And those people keep diaries. So there's all of those things. And there is a woman who's slightly later, but not much later, called Paulina Dlamini, who describes being... She's kind of a handmaiden at court. So she describes being an insider, and she subsequently converts and, goes and lives at the mission station and all of that, but she wrote an autobiography. And so I pulled out all of those references, and then I went to all the archaeologists who can tell you, like, from pottery shards, like, what was in the pots and that kind of stuff. So we've compiled quite an accurate, well, I hope an accurate dossier of what was being farmed, foraged, hunted, what tools were being used, all of that. If you want to know, like, how you catch an elephant in 1824, I can show you a picture of the trap and what it looked like, etc. And then, how do you store the food? What does the granary look like? Those kind of things. The grinding stones, for instance, that the grinding stones for maize are different for grinding stones for smaller grains like sorghum and millet.
Sure.
So the grinding stones at Shaka's court are that shape. They don't have that kind of long, thin kind of dip that more modern grinding stones have.
And why is that? Why are they that shape?
Because you need, and then they've got a tiny little dip in the center. You need to retain them in that place. Whereas because mealies are so big, they, when you do that, you don't automatically just lose them all. They don't all fly off. So, yeah, that's a sort of slightly obsessional document. I'm not sure, and none of it, very little of it, is in, is the main event in the story. It's all the kind of little background things, who's scaring birds in the field, those kinds of things that you might not even notice. But
are so key to the authenticity of the
getting
story,
it right.
the honesty of the story.
And I think especially with somebody like Shaka, who is either so sort of deified or vilified, he's either like a genius or a monster. You actually, to be able to say this is a man with all these kind of personality foibles, this is a real person with strengths and weaknesses and likes and dislikes, and that's quite useful to put the humanity back into these kind of iconic figures. So that's what I've been doing, is hounding people on the set about the fact that, why is that mealie meal so white? And in general, there's almost no pup in the early 19th century, regardless of what it's made with. Even when they are cooking with corn, they are not making pup. So, yes, I'm like the mealie meal police at this point.
Would you say it's accurate to say you're at least one of the custodians of our history, especially when it comes to heritage, culture, food, and how the three kind of intersect? Because there's so much that, is not exactly written down, that you're kind of a custodian?
Look, I like it a lot. In that I tend to write about it. And if that is useful, then that's great. I think every generation probably rediscovers the same things. That actually, if you look, there's all sorts of people who have kind of worked in this space before. We just forget.
True.
Every 20 years we start again.
Then it seems new.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then the other thing I wanted to ask was about the work that you do at Harvesting Heritage. What is Harvesting Heritage, and what exactly do you guys do there?
Harvesting Heritage is a bit of a passion project, really, because, we haven't succeeded in making it make any money. But what we do, we do have a lovely time, and I do think it's worthwhile, is two things. First of all, to connect chefs with small farmers growing heritage ingredients, and then to connect chefs with people in those farming communities who are cooking those ingredients, because chefs love to work with an interesting ingredient, but often they don't actually know how to use it. And as with anything, you can't innovate what you don't know.
Sure.
So first you really need to know how you work with jugo beans or lerotse or whatever it is in a traditional way. And then
you can innovate from there.
Innovate as much as you like, but you do kind of need to understand the ingredients. So, and then what we have done is run a couple of culinary competitions. My favourite of which was a pastry competition that the Saxon Hotel were lovely and hosted us. And I think they probably thought it was worthwhile in the end, that we were a lot of bother in between. But the work that those chefs produced using the heritage ingredients, and really, pastry is so innovative innately, and because Southern Africa doesn't really have a strong pastry tradition, there's a lot more space to be innovative in that. But there were just some absolutely beautiful things that, shigugu, for instance, in a chocolate tart she'd made a sorghum pastry base, and it was just so delicious and so beautiful. Those amatungulu, those num-num berries, she'd made the winner, who was a girl called Catherine Apollos, had made like a jelly, and with the num berries, and what is he called? Kenosi from Les Créatifs, the pastry chef there, had done amazing. He'd made sorbets out of monkey oranges. And are they called Le Rapa, I think it's called.
Yeah.
And yeah, so beautiful, beautiful creative stuff. Some fantastic young chefs. I mean, the girl who won, Catherine Napolis, is probably the best pastry chef in the country. And that was probably a foregone conclusion because she's so fabulous. She was always going to win. But, you know, there were a couple of young chefs who you thought, okay, you know, that this is your first competition and this is really amazing and creative. And so, yeah, we host competitions so that chefs can have a space to do that kind of innovative stuff, and so that the farmers can have a space where their ingredients are purchased, because you have to purchase from the community, that whichever is the community that we've picked in for that particular competition. And then it's also just fun, you know, because the lady farmers also come to the competition and they're always very entertained that somebody made ice cream out of marula nuts and baobab. Or, I mean, I think they think we're a bit daft, but yeah, so everybody kind of gets to feel like they taught somebody something, you know, it goes both ways. I don't like relationships that sort of feel one-sided. So, yeah, Harvesting Heritage creates those relationships, partly because I think, you know, if we are going to create a new South African cuisine, you know, that's really hard, you know, that there have been so many forces that have, like, distanced people from ingredients, from tastes, from that. And that's true of New Nordic cuisine and New Andean as well, is the first thing you need to do is acknowledge that we don't actually know that much at this point, and go and ask people, you know. There are ladies in Limpopo who do know how to work with this indigenous melon. So ask them, you know, respect that kind of ancient knowledge. And yeah, so that's kind of what we do.
That's amazing. So respect the custodians and then innovate from there.
Yeah, I think both farmers and chefs are often disrespected, that people think that, you know, if you do that job, it's because you can't do anything else. You know, they tend to think that. And that's so far from the truth. And yeah, together they're a really good team.
An incredible force. So tell me, what would be best case scenario with Harvesting Heritage?
Look, it would be really nice to get funding to do that, because at the moment I'm just sort of calling in favors, and you know, like the nice lady at the Saxon that you know, if you kind of so I mean, we're at the moment doing that all very much through kind of whining, begging and pleading. So it would be lovely to get proper funding. But I mean, this is, you know, this is a difficult economy to be doing that in. And so at the moment, that's sort of for all of us. You know, that's our sort of that little passion project that we kind of do on the side, and every time we finish a competition we say never again.
And if the money arrives today, what will it enable you to do?
You know, it would probably enable us to do more competitions, and do more promoting of the heritage ingredients, so more taking young chefs into rural communities. Because most of the people who are chefs are very urban, you know, so, you know, regardless of who their grandmother was, they really don't know those ingredients. And a lot of people who've been to chef school have actively been trained out of those skills, you know, so in a lot of ways, even if they know things, they've forgotten that they know those things. They don't know how to, like, peel the prickly bits off pumpkin.
That's such a word. Have actively been trained out of sort of that knowledge.
Yeah, I mean, I used to teach at the Prue Leith Chef School, which I loved. But I used to feel that for very ordinary students, we taught them lots of things.
Yeah.
For really special students, the one that you came in thinking, okay, well, you're just like super talented already.
Yeah.
Often we kind of thwarted their talent. And for a lot of the black students, just absolutely not seeing any reflection of African ingredients, flavor combinations, methods, you know, that is so undermining, because you're saying be somebody else.
Absolutely.
And that the only way you can do this thing you love is to be somebody else.
Is to abandon everything about who you are.
Yeah. And so I think that it's a nice phase to be in where, you know, young chefs are being, you know, South Africans are not terribly good at it yet, but they do see new Nordic and new Andean cuisine, especially the example of Peru and how they've just changed the way the world thinks about Lima, you know.
Yeah.
Lima was that city where people got kidnapped, and at a push you flew into the airport there and went to Machu Picchu as quickly as you could, you know. That it's Joburg, you know. It's that city that people just say, oh, it's all about crime and grime and there's no culture. And within 10 years, you know, focusing on indigenous and heritage cuisine, they have created this whole new image of this town. And there is absolutely no reason why you couldn't do that for Joburg. And I think that if one could persuade government to see that food culture is a very valuable investment, because suddenly all those people that are flying to Lima to, you know, eat at the 5 best restaurants, you know, they start coming here.
Absolutely.
And, you know, it just feels so short-sighted. And I do think that quite often, you know, I've tried talking to government people about this, and they are quite happy with the bit about the rural old ladies. That they can sort of understand. But when you say, and now we want to put those ingredients in fine dining restaurants, they get very worried, because their sense of how you transform a society is all about transforming it from below. And that is absolutely has to be part of it. But they sort of think there's something immoral about fancy restaurants, you know, that somehow you are betraying the working class if you're saying, you know, look at Fabulous Kinosi and his monkey orange sorbet. So they're uneasy about that. And yet that's where the kind of big tourism money could come, is in saying new African cuisine is this kind of amazing Joburg phenomenon. And I really think that's not a thing Cape Town can do. That has to come from Joburg.
I agree.
So, and we are missing that opportunity. And actually, Lagos is not missing that opportunity. So if we don't kind of watch it, that will be the kind of great new African cuisine focus. And that's a real shame, because then they'll get all the tourists.
Yeah. You're making me think about Thai food and what the Thai government did with their food. Investing all that money into sort of recreating, or actually creating from scratch what Thai food is. And look what they've managed to achieve with that program.
And you know, that you can see, if you look at all of these sort of state-funded processes that were about conversations between the past and the present and the future through food. They've all been such good value for money, whether it's Mexico or Thailand or, you know, Copenhagen, the new Nordic. You know, Copenhagen was that place that had like rubbishy pork products and butter mountains. And, now that's kind of the center of the food world. So, I suppose that's the other thing. You said, what excites me? That idea really excites me.
So we need to get you in the Department of Arts and Culture.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
I long to be in the Department of Arts and Culture. When I am queen, we will be putting money into new African cuisine. So innovative but respectful and authentic African flavors, and regionally specific. I don't like it. So often, even in South Africa, people will say, we've got heritage ingredients and it's a restaurant in Joburg and the heritage ingredient is buchu. You think, well, that's not indigenous to this part of the country.
You can't lump everything together.
It's indigenous to somewhere in South Africa, but not here. Tell me about where I am and who I'm with.
I hear you. I hear you.
Yeah, so that and bananas are my favorite things.
Yeah. You spoke about teaching at Prue Leith. Is that when you wrote the syllabus on African food?
Well, it is when I first wrote that syllabus. So I wrote that syllabus. My child is 16 and I wrote it long before he was born. So it's probably at least 20 years ago.
Yeah.
And then it was a very kind of respectful but traditional look at what are the core ingredients, what are the flavor combinations for all the regions in Africa. That I've subsequently revised it. And it's now, because the world changed in the meantime, and there was all this kind of innovation within African food and African chefs. And, given that the kids who are reading that document and working from it are wanting to be chefs, that it is aspirational to see that there's a Nigerian with a Michelin star in London and those kinds of things. So it is now all of those kind of, here's the core ingredients, here's the core flavor combinations, here's the core techniques, here's the core food history and food culture, that you can't talk about West Africa, for instance, without talking about the slave trade, without talking about the Columbian exchange of ingredients and cultures, without talking about the Americas, that how connected those are. So a lot of that, a lot of fun stuff, silly little memes and YouTube videos, and to sort of make it feel like current, modern and current and all of those things as well. And a lot on what is new African cuisine, how do you be creative within an African space, because what you don't want to do is turn into places like Moyo that are like Afro Disney. You don't want to be Children's Party Africa, drumming and face painting, that
gimmicky.
You want to be, how do we kind of channel these kids who are modern world citizens as well as South Africans and chefs into being their most creative selves. I've recently rewritten it, it was nice.
And how would one gain access to it? Is it the property of Prue Leith?
It's the property of Prue Leith, but what we're doing is we are about to start doing online courses.
Nice.
So that people can do it in other parts of the world, other parts of the country. And we're doing like a general introduction that everybody does. And then you can choose to do particular regions. So if you're particularly interested in Central Africa, or islands off the East Coast or whatever, you can just do the region that you most like, or you can do it all.
Yeah. And then now tell me about all the books that you've authored. I mean, the many books that you've co-authored and authored. Which one's been your favorite? That's a hard question. But tell me about that experience to putting together these books and why.
Can I...
Let's start with the most recent. I think that's Eating.
Yeah, I think so.
Correct. Yeah.
I think so.
So tell me about, putting together that book. You co-wrote that with Mpo.
Look, Mpo just wrote me a letter saying, she actually said, because Mpo is a dietitian, and she said she was tired of helping women get into their skinny jeans, and that she wanted to do something that was more sort of about food and society, and could she come and talk to me about what that might be?
Yeah.
And, I didn't have any idea about the actual question, but I did know that Mpo was fabulous. And it turned out, actually, she was practically my neighbour, that we both lived in Hartbeespoort. So, and she was describing how, all the dietitians' books are written, mostly they're written in North America with North Americans in mind.
Yeah, with a very Western lens.
And specifically within that, with an American middle class lens. And so the ingredients are either not available, or they're very expensive, or people don't like them. It's things that people just don't like the taste of. And Mpo had essentially in her head, I'm making this because it's like a list. She had like a conversion chart in her head. So when it said blueberries you can only buy in certain supermarkets for at vast expense, she would say, but every township garden's got a mulberry tree, and grandpa moaning that it's bringing mosquitoes. All the same nutrients in those mulberries, eat those instead. Nice. Or that there's all this kind of Ponzi stuff around fermenting and kimchi and, kombucha and all of that. But ting, this is fermentation central, that there's very few people who ferment as much as Southern Africans. Yeah. It's like, that way, like with Afrikaners, they can make jam out of anything. It's like their superpower. Yeah. That for Black South Africans, fermenting is their superpower, that there's nothing that they don't sour. So all of those, whether it's ting or amasi or whatever, all of those ferments are, they contain all the same nutritional value, and yet that is something that's cheap, that is something that people like the taste of, it's accessible.
It's familiar, so you are likely to,
exactly. You don't have to, if you want to get into your skinny jeans or whatever it is, you don't have to become somebody else to do it. So that's sort of what eating is about. And I think, so there's an example of food anthropology, is that the first thing we did was talk to lots of people about obesity and what were the factors in their lives that were causing those. And those were quite Southern African specific, and they were especially, most of the people that we talked to were first generation middle class people. Yeah. So their lives were quite different from their children's lives, the experience of growing up for them, and the rates of childhood obesity. Because whatever else has happened in South Africa in the last 20 years, people have got richer. Yeah. So, and the black middle class has grown enormously, and there are huge challenges around, people just endlessly saying things like, we go home at Christmas and my kid won't eat any of the food. And, it's so embarrassing when she cries when there's a slaughtering, or she won't eat tripe, or, they just whine for McDonald's. And so all of those issues around, how do you bring all of those healthy components in traditional South African diets into the world that people now live in.
Sort of, not ignoring the new world that you're in, but integrating the really incredible things about the tradition.
Yeah, because I think that we are heading for some kind of big kind of like emotional crash. If I look at the number of black children who not only won't eat but do not know about traditional food. And that's just the most accessible aspect of culture. So, and And while a lot of people are so proud of how good their kids' English is, for instance, I think there's like an emotional breakdown coming in that child's future, because, you know, it's hard enough. Identity is such a hard thing to do anyway, without... And once you've lost food culture, it's gone, because so much isn't written down. If your mum doesn't show you...
Yeah, and it's so intuitive. Once you've lost it, it's almost impossible to get it. If the generation that should have passed it on doesn't,
it's the most vulnerable. Except maybe dancing. I've been looking at pairings, food pairings, and wanting to look at how other artistic pairings work. So do food pairings work the same way that dance pairings work? So I was looking at jive and the way that, you know, the one person pushes and the other person pulls. So you know, that these are, you know, you're better together than either of you are apart, the same way that food and wine pairings work. And so I was trying to find out about, everybody says that the jive that people were dancing in Sophiatown was completely unique in the way that African jazz is unique, in that it had African dance elements. But nobody has written down what they were, and there is no footage of it. So people make this assertion. So, but, you know, with music is so much less vulnerable because, you know, the notes have been written down. But so often with food and dance, it kind of lives in the air, and if you don't catch it, it's gone.
And then if it goes, it goes.
If you can't find an old lady that can still do that dance step, it's gone.
Sure. Anna, you've given us so much to think about, you know, when it comes to actually documenting who we are.
Popular culture, and often it's the culture that women like that is least documented, you know, the bits of culture that are considered women's work. And actually they're usually the bits that are the most vital for survival.
Absolutely, that carry a nation.
Yeah.
Sure. So for someone that's interested in, you know, food anthropology, interested in one day becoming a historical food advisor for a big show like Shaka Ilembe, you know, with your career in mind, what would you say is sort of kind of a roadmap to kind of follow? Do I need to study anthropology and then also study to become a chef? How do I...
Look, I think for me, those skills have been useful.
Yeah.
I think, you know, there's no point in trying to sort of be the mad jumble of things that I am. But if there is a lesson to learn, it's that if you are interested in quite diverse things, at some point you see how they connect, you know, that it's all coming out of the same brain. So it will make a shape, and, you know, if you're lucky, you can make that work. So it doesn't matter if you're, I don't know, an engineer that wants to go to chef school, that will prove extremely useful when, you know, school feeding schemes need mobile kitchens to be designed or whatever, you know, that it sort of works itself out, I suppose.
I think what I'm hearing is you don't always have to have it all figured out, but just show up to each thing and together. One day you'll know why you had to make this detour.
Well, yeah, but I mean, I'm always very impressed the way, and maybe you'll say, oh God, I haven't got a plan. It certainly appears like you've got a plan. And I think that a plan is a jolly good thing, and yeah, I don't have one, but I'm very admiring of people that do.
Well, things have worked out. Things have worked out like you had one.
Yeah.
Like you had one. So with so much success under your belt, I mean, you've been awarded many times as a journalist. With the books that you've written, you've won Gourmand Food Awards. What would you say is the next thing that you would love to conquer?
I mean, this is
the next big plan.
The thing that I am really interested in, I mean, other than like nonsense like bananas and stuff, is I am interested in AI, and it's potential to support creativity. And I think that, that people in the creative space are so easily threatened because it is scary.
I was about to say, it's interesting as a creative that you're interested in AI.
But you can't fight them.
Because we're so scared of them.
So you may as well sort of be excited by what they can do. And every time I kind of interact with some kind of AI creativity resource, I am struck by how very clever they are.
Sure.
And so I think we need to find ways of making those machines work with us, because it's no longer about work for us.
It's inevitable. Yeah.
But if you're nice to them, you can work with them. So yeah, I think that's...
Fingers crossed.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you so much, Anna, for making the time to chat with us. This has been really, really incredible. We adore you, and thank you for the amazing work that you do to document and really preserve who we are as a people.
Oh, well, thank you. Yeah, thank you for having me.
I'm a big fan.
Oh, me too. Thank you.
Thank you, and thank you so much for watching. See you on the next episode. This has been Chefing Beyond the Kitchen. Hope you enjoyed this conversation. Please remember to like, comment, and subscribe. I'll see you on the next one.